Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this watercolor nightscape in less than 30 minutes of active painting time. For our colors, we're going to be using Payne's Gray, Ultramarine Blue, Violet, Black, and either a little bit of white gouache or white acrylic. And if your watercolor set doesn't include Payne's Gray, you could always use either a Prussian blue or maybe a navy blue or just some kind of blue that is darker than your ultramarine. The first thing that we're going to do is add water to our paper and our watercolor palette. You want your paper to be damp, not wet, so don't add so much water that there is pooling or any puddles. I like to use a little spray bottle, but if you have a big brush, you could just wet your brush and then cover the whole thing in a wash of water. I ended up taking my small brush because this is kind of like the biggest flat brush that I have right now. And I just smooth all of the water all the way over the paper so that it's evenly coated. Your paper is likely going to curl whenever you have the water on there. If you want less curling, you could always try to tape down the edges or make a little tape border and tape it to the back of your table or your desk that you're working on. However, I didn't want a border, so I just ended up letting it curl and didn't really have a problem with it. After your paper has an even amount of water on it, you're going to want to take a larger flat brush or a larger round brush, load it up with some water and either your Payne's Gray or navy blue, whichever one that you're using, and you're going to apply this color to the entirety of the paper so that there's no white showing. I don't normally apply an even wash when I'm doing this because I found that having certain parts of the page that have a little bit more color and some parts having less color makes it more visually interesting, because whenever you look at the night sky, there are parts that appear a little darker and a little brighter because of all of the galaxies and the stars out there. To get these areas of more intense color, I do like to kind of tap in some paint a little bit randomly throughout the page. Like I said, I don't do it very uniformly. I like to tap in a little bit on some parts and then blend out other parts, but you can really be kind of like random with this if you want those areas of darker color. If you want it to be completely smooth, you're going to want to just take a huge brush, biggest one that you could probably find, and just do an even wash of color all the way across. And if you find that the edges of your paper are drying out, or if there are any spots that are not still damp, you can always wet a brush and then just do like a wash of just water on that section. Now that I have a wash of Payne's Gray in the background, I am just taking a little bit more of a concentrated version of Payne's Gray and tapping in these little sections of color. I'm also going to start using my Ultramarine Blue and tapping in color just across the whole thing. It's not going to be super planned, it's going to try and be a little bit more random so that it will look more natural, but you just tap in these little things of color and they're going to spread out naturally if your paper is still damp. I will say, while I did add in a little bit of Payne's Gray and then the Ultramarine for this section, I also went in and added a little bit of Prussian Blue all over the page using this tapping method. If you are using Prussian Blue or navy blue in place of Payne's Gray, you could just pick a different kind of blue on top of that to get this effect, or just continue using what you're already using, because this was really to kind of color balance it back to a little bit more blue instead of being so gray. Because the sky takes up so much of the page in the background, we're going to be focusing on it the most out of any other portion of this painting. This means that you're going to have to be really patient with me, because we are going to be layering a lot of the same colors over and over and over again until we get something that is not super patchy and that looks very galaxy-esque in it. So for this portion, I am layering Payne's Gray, Prussian Blue, and Ultramarine over and over and over again on top of each other until it looks like it will not dry down to a super light color. I don't want it to look splotchy. See how in the top right corner and the top of it right now, it just looks like there are some splotchy dots? You don't want to see those after you get to a certain point. So the more spots that you add while the paper is damp, the more it's going to blend into each other and create this galaxy effect. the page looks pretty solid with that blue color, I am taking purple and I am tapping that in a very similar way as I did with the blues and the Payne's Gray, except for I am not going to try and cover the whole page with this purple or this violet color. I'm just doing very specific spots that I think it would look good in. If you are bolder than I am, this is also the point where you could add in a little bit of pink in the areas that you're putting purple. However, I didn't do that for this video. After you finish tapping in your purple, you're going to let your painting dry completely. You do not want it to be damp at all because we're no longer working wet into wet. We're going to be working wet into dry. I highly recommend that you let it air dry, that way there aren't as many harsh water lines when it does dry down. Now that the base layer of the background is done, we're going to be working on the foreground, which is the foliage and the trees. You're going to want to take a concentrated amount of that Prussian blue or your navy blue, whichever blue is your darkest blue. And you're going to use a round brush to kind of tap in these little leaf tree foliage marks. I like to hold my brush at almost like a 45-degree angle for this and stamp it into the page so that it gets some of that round brush point to it and it looks more like some pointy little leaves instead of blobs. Your tree line can be really whatever shape that you want. I just like to make some parts taller than the rest because it just shows that maybe some of it looks a little further and some of the trees are a little closer. Now that your tree line has been filled in, we're going to take a little bit of black and make almost like a second tree line just below where our first tree line was. So you're going to be covering a little bit of the blue that you already painted, and you're going to follow that same step of stamping it on to look like leaves, but you're not covering the entirety of the blue tree background. This is going to create the effect of a backlit look, as if the trees were being illuminated from above and behind them. Here I am taking some more of the darkest blue that I have, which is my Prussian blue, and I am just taking my teeny tiniest little round brush and drawing in these power lines. You don't need to do this if you don't want to. Honestly, I kind of struggled to make these power lines, but you know, practice makes better, and I want to see what I can do. Maybe I can get better at this over time. With the foreground done, we are now going to revisit the background. This is where you're going to take either your white gouache or white acrylic paint. You're going to get a round brush and start stamping in these little teeny tiny dots somewhat sporadically. You don't want there to be too much of a pattern or it's going to look like you hand drew these on, even though you did. I highly recommend using a few different size brushes when doing this. That way you have some stars that look bigger and brighter and some stars that look smaller and dimmer and maybe further away. If you do not want to hand paint in tons of teeny tiny little stars, you could always do the splatter paint technique. You want to make sure that your foreground is covered with a page or paper or something so that the white paint doesn't get on it. But what you would do is water down a little bit of gouache or acrylic, and then take your paintbrush and kind of flick the bristles towards your page so that it has like a splatter paint effect of the white paint onto your background. You could stop here if this is the look that you want, but I debated whether or not I should put a moon, and I decided that I wanted to try putting a moon because I'm not good at crescent shapes. So I went ahead and I added this little bitty moon, which once again, you could do it or you could leave it. Either way, make it your own. But that is pretty much the last thing that I do on this painting. So there you have it. That is how I personally paint nightscapes and different night scenes, I guess. I hope this was helpful and that you enjoyed this. Please, please, please let me know if you have any other tutorials that you would like for me to make, and I will see if I can make them. As always, like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you want to see more of my stuff, and comment if you want to. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next time. Bye.